The vast darkness of space was broken by the sleek silver form of the Alliance ship as it entered Earth's solar system. On board, Admiral Zixtar nervously adjusted his uniform. After losing 3 major battles in the past month, the Alliance, a free species, was desperate for new allies. "We are approaching the 3rd planet, Admiral," reported Navigator Pell. "Their defensive satellites have detected us." "Open communications," ordered Zixtar. "Let us hope these humans are willing to talk." On Earth, the detection of an alien vessel sent governments into emergency sessions. In Washington, D.C., military leaders gathered quickly in a secure underground facility. "The ship is holding position beyond lunar orbit," said General Maria Collins, pointing to the large screen showing the alien vessel. "They're broadcasting on multiple frequencies. It appears to be a request for communication." President Harris nodded. "Who's heading our first contact team?" "Captain Laura Bennett," replied General Collins. "Former Marine, 2 tours in combat zones, now our top diplomatic security officer. If anyone can size up potential threats, it's her." Laura Bennett stood perfectly still as the transport pod carried her team toward the Alliance ship. At 45, her brown hair was streaked with gray, but her eyes remained sharp and alert. 20 years in the Marines had taught her to observe everything. "Remember," she told her team of 4 other veterans, "we're here to listen and learn. But stay alert." The humans were escorted to a large meeting room where Admiral Zixtar waited with his staff. The Admiral was tall and thin with blue-tinted skin and 4 arms. He bowed formally. "Welcome, representatives of Earth. I am Admiral Zixtar of the Alliance of Free Species. We come seeking assistance against a common enemy." Laura stepped forward. "Captain Laura Bennett, Earth Diplomatic Corps. We're interested in hearing more about this alliance and the enemy you mentioned." For the next 2 hours, Admiral Zixtar explained how the Corvan Empire had been expanding across the galaxy for centuries, conquering one species after another. The alliance had been formed to resist, but they were losing ground. "We need new allies with fresh perspectives," Zixtar concluded. "Our long-range scans showed your planet might have suitable technology." Laura listened carefully. "What kind of assistance are you looking for? Technology, resources, troops?" "All would be welcome," said Zixtar, "but primarily strategic and tactical support. The Corvans have been fighting the same way for centuries, and they've perfected their methods. We need new approaches." Laura nodded. "Earth has a long history of warfare and adapting to different combat situations. Our representatives will need to discuss this request with our leaders, of course." When Laura's team returned to Earth, they brought data about both the Alliance and the Corvan Empire. Military analysts spent days reviewing the information. 1 week later, Earth agreed to join the Alliance. A delegation of alien military officers arrived to assess what Earth could contribute to the war effort. Major Frank Dawson, a retired Army Ranger with 25 years of service, was assigned as their guide. Frank was a broad-shouldered man with a quiet voice and watchful eyes. His first task was to show the aliens Earth's military history. "This building houses our National War Museum," Frank explained as he led 5 Alliance officers into a large, stone building in Washington. "It contains artifacts and information about Earth's conflicts throughout our recorded history." The aliens moved slowly through exhibits, showing everything from ancient swords to modern weaponry. They paused at a display about guerrilla warfare. "What is this concept?" asked Colonel Trell, the lead Alliance officer. "Fighting like small animals?" Frank smiled slightly. "It's a style of warfare where smaller, less equipped forces use hit-and-run tactics against a larger enemy. Instead of meeting them in open battle, you strike quickly from hiding, then disappear." Colonel Trell looked confused. "But where is the honor in such fighting? Where are the battle lines?" "In many Earth conflicts, survival became more important than traditional honor," Frank explained. "When faced with a stronger enemy, humans adapt and find different ways to fight." The aliens looked at each other with concern. This was not what they had expected. As they continued through the museum, the Alliance officers grew increasingly quiet. The exhibits on psychological warfare, urban combat, and asymmetric tactics seemed to disturb them deeply. "Your species has fought against itself?" asked Lieutenant Mira, her four eyes blinking rapidly. For most of your history? Frank nodded. Unfortunately, yes. Earth's nations have been at war with each other for thousands of years. Only in the last century have we begun to unite more fully. And these methods, Colonel Trell gestured toward a display about Special Forces operations, using small teams to infiltrate enemy territory, sabotage their equipment, gather intelligence. Standard practice for Earth militaries, Frank confirmed. When you can't match an enemy's strength, you find their weaknesses. That evening, the Alliance officers requested to see actual footage of Earth combat. Frank arranged a viewing room where they watched recordings from various conflicts from World War II through recent regional wars, the footage of soldiers fighting house to house in destroyed cities, of troops enduring extreme weather conditions, of wounded personnel continuing to fight. All of it seemed to shock the aliens. Your people continue fighting even when wounded? Asked Colonel Trell. Often, said Frank. The will to survive, to protect your fellow soldiers, can push humans beyond normal limits. After the viewing, the Alliance officers gathered privately. Their conversation was tense. These humans, whispered Lieutenant Mira. They fight like nothing I've seen in our records. Colonel Trell nodded slowly. They have a saying, adapt or die. I believe they have adapted to warfare in ways the Corvins have never imagined. 3 days later, Earth's leaders and the Alliance representatives signed a formal treaty. Earth would join the Alliance, providing both strategic advisors and combat veterans to train Alliance forces. Admiral Zixtar addressed the assembled human representatives as the treaty was finalized. When we came to Earth, we thought we understood combat, he said solemnly. We have fought the Corvins for generations, but your species has shown us that what we know about warfare is limited. You have faced challenges we never imagined and developed methods we never considered. He paused, looking at the human veterans in attendance. The Corvins believe they have perfected warfare. They have not yet met Earth's veterans. As the Alliance ship departed Earth with the first group of human advisors on board, Laura Bennett stood by the viewport, watching her home planet shrink in the distance. Do you think we can really make a difference? Asked Jack Rivera, a former ROI Army sergeant standing beside her. Laura turned to him, her expression determined. The Alliance has been fighting a conventional war against an enemy that knows all their moves. We're about to introduce them to unconventional warfare. She smiled, slightly. The Corvins won't know what hit them. Lieutenant Colonel Samantha Rivera stood before the mixed group of human veterans and Alliance soldiers. At 52, she had more combat experience than most people would see in 3 lifetimes. Her short gray hair framed a face marked with both age and the scars of past battles. Today we begin integration training, she announced to the room. The Corvins think they know how we fight. They're wrong. The large training facility on the Alliance space station Liberty had been specially modified for the human trainers. Earth gravity had been simulated, and the temperature adjusted to human comfort levels. Commander Vrax, the Alliance officer in charge of the station, looked doubtful. These methods of yours seem disorganized, Colonel Rivera. War is disorganized, Commander, Samantha replied. The side that adapts fastest usually wins. In the first week, the cultural differences became clear. Alliance soldiers were used to fighting in perfect formations with clear command structures. When former Army Sergeant Joe Martinez introduced them to urban combat techniques, they struggled to understand. Why hide behind walls? Asked Lieutenant Krev, a stocky Alliance soldier with dark purple skin. The Corvins will simply blast through them. Joe picked up a piece of broken concrete. Every piece of destroyed building becomes a weapon or a shield. In city fighting, the environment is your ally. He set up a simulation of a damaged city block. Your team has been separated from your main force. You have limited ammunition. The enemy has superior numbers. How do you survive and complete your mission? The Alliance soldiers looked at each other in confusion. This scenario made no sense to them. Their training had always taught them to maintain formation and fight as a unit. We would call for reinforcements, said Lieutenant Krev finally. Communications are down, Joe replied. We would retreat to a defensible position and wait for rescue. Joe shook his head. The mission is time-sensitive. People will die if you don't complete it. The Alliance soldiers fell silent. This kind of thinking was alien to them. In another training area, retired Navy SEAL Kevin Walsh was teaching aquatic warfare. The Alliance species rarely fought in water, considering it a barrier rather than a battlefield. Water can hide you, muffle sound, and let you approach targets undetected, Kevin explained. He demonstrated underwater breathing techniques and silent swimming methods. But enemy sensors will detect us, protested an Alliance soldier. Kevin smiled. Not if you understand how those sensors work and how to avoid them. By the third week, the Alliance military leadership had begun to grasp what made human veterans different. It wasn't just their tactics, it was their mindset. At a senior staff meeting, Commander Vrax tried to explain this to Admiral Zixtar. These humans, they think about warfare differently, said Vrax. They expect things to go wrong. They train for failure. That seems pessimistic, replied the Admiral. Yet effective, said Vrax. They have a saying, no plan survives contact with the enemy. So they create flexible plans that can change as needed. The Alliance medical team was equally fascinated by human psychology. Dr. Lin, the chief medical officer, had been studying reports on human PTSD and other combat-related conditions. These humans continue fighting, even when they know it will harm them mentally, she told her staff. They accept psychological damage as part of combat. Is that not inefficient? Asked a junior doctor. Perhaps, said Dr. Lin. Or perhaps it shows a depth of commitment we have not understood before. The training program had been running for just over a month when the emergency call came in. A small Alliance outpost near the Corvan border was under attack. The closest response team was still 2 hours away. Captain Diane Kelly, a former Air Force pilot with extensive combat experience, was in the command center when the distress signal arrived. We have a mixed human Alliance training squad in Hangar B, she said to Commander Vrax. We can be there in 40 minutes. Vrax hesitated. They are not cleared for actual combat missions yet. People are dying, Commander, Diane said firmly. We can help. After a moment, Vrax nodded. Go, but be careful. The team, 5 human veterans and 7 Alliance soldiers, boarded a fast transport ship. During the flight, Diane outlined her plan. The Corvans won't expect a small team to engage them directly. They'll be focused on overwhelming the outpost defenses, she explained. We'll use that to our advantage. Lieutenant Krev, who had been training with Joe Martinez, spoke up. Like urban combat, use the environment and surprise. Diane nodded, surprised. Exactly. When they arrived at the outpost, the situation was grim. The Corvan forces, roughly 30 soldiers with heavy weapons, had the small outpost surrounded. The defenders were pinned down and running out of ammunition. We don't have enough firepower to take them head-on, said Diane. We don't need to, replied former Marine Greg Wilson. We just need to confuse them long enough for the main response team to arrive. The humans quickly improvised weapons using equipment from their transport ship. They modified communication devices to create distractions and rigged fuel cells to make small, controlled explosions. The Alliance soldiers watched in amazement as the humans transformed ordinary items into tools of war. Is this how you fought? On Earth? Asked Lieutenant Krev. When we had to, said Greg. You use what you have. Their attack began with a series of small explosions at different points around the Corvan position. As the enemy forces turned to respond to these apparent threats, the team infiltrated their perimeter. Rather than engaging in direct combat, they focused on creating confusion, cutting communication lines, triggering alarms, and giving the impression of a much larger attacking force. They're breaking formation, reported one of the Alliance soldiers watching through binoculars. They don't understand what's happening. That's the point, Diane said with a grim smile. By the time the main Alliance response team arrived, the Corvan attack had already fallen apart. Confused and believing they were surrounded, many had retreated. The rest were quickly captured. Commander Vrax personally met the team when they returned to the Liberty Station. Your methods were unusual, he said to Diane. but effective. The outpost commander reports only 3 minor injuries. Unconventional warfare, Diane explained. Sometimes the best way to win a fight is to make the enemy think they can't win. That evening, Admiral Zixitar called an emergency meeting of the Alliance High Command. The recording of the outpost defense was played for all to see. "These human veterans," said the Admiral after the viewing, "have shown us something important. The Corvins have been fighting us for centuries because they believe they understand our tactics completely." He paused, looking around the table. They have never encountered humans before. They do not understand how Earth's veterans think about combat. And that, added Commander Vrax, may be our greatest advantage. The success at the outpost changed everything. Within days, Alliance High Command approved a new strategy. Small teams of human veterans would be paired with Alliance soldiers for special missions behind enemy lines. Former Marine sniper Alan Rodriguez sat perfectly still in the observation post. For 3 days, he had not moved more than a few inches at a time. The planet Nexus IV was hot and humid with dense purple vegetation that reminded him of jungles on Earth. Beside him, Lieutenant Mira of the Alliance watched in amazement. "How can you remain so still?" she whispered. Her 4 eyes blinked rapidly. "In the heat." "Practice," Alan whispered back. "In sniper school, we would sit in position for days sometimes." They were watching a Corvin command center built into the side of a mountain. Intelligence suggested that 3 high-ranking Corvin officers were meeting there to plan the next major offensive. "The building is shielded," Mira reminded him. "Our regular weapons cannot penetrate it." Alan adjusted his rifle slightly. It was a unique weapon, created by combining Earth sniper technology with Alliance energy systems. "I don't need to penetrate the building," he said. "Just wait for the target to step outside." On the other side of the planet, Navy veteran Grace Phillips led another team infiltrating a Corvin supply depot. Grace had spent 15 years in naval intelligence before joining this mission. She understood how to repurpose civilian technology for military use. "These communication devices," she explained to her Alliance teammates, "we can modify them to mimic Corvin security badges." "Won't their systems detect the fake?" asked Sergeant Locks, an Alliance soldier. Grace smiled. "They'll detect something that looks almost right but has a small error. They'll think it's just a system glitch. Happens all the time with complex technology." Her team successfully entered the depot and planted small devices on the fuel containers. These weren't bombs. They were transmitters that would allow Alliance ships to track Corvin supply vessels. Back at the command center, Alan's patience was rewarded. A Corvin general stepped onto a balcony to survey the area. With one careful shot, Alan eliminated the target. "Target down," he reported quietly. "Let's move to extraction point." Mira stared at him. "The shot was nearly 2 kilometers. How did you calculate for wind, gravity, and atmosphere?" "Experience," Alan replied simply. "Years of practice." As these missions continued, the Corvins began to notice something had changed. Their commanders were being picked off by unseen snipers. Their supply lines were compromised. Their secure communications somehow leaked information. The Corvin Supreme Commander, Darvik, called an emergency meeting of his senior staff. "Something has changed in Alliance tactics," he told them. "They no longer fight as they have for centuries. They have become unpredictable." "Our intelligence suggests they have new allies," replied his chief advisor. "A species called humans from a planet called Earth." "What do we know about these humans?" "Very little. They are physically unremarkable. Their technology is less advanced than ours, but they seem to have extensive experience with warfare." Darvik frowned. "How can that be? They have only recently achieved space travel." "They have fought against themselves," explained the advisor. "Their planet has a long history of internal conflicts." Meanwhile, the Alliance had embraced another human concept: psychological warfare. Commander Daniel Wright, a former intelligence officer with 20 years of experience, had developed a new program. "The Corvins have never faced an enemy that uses misinformation," he explained to Admiral Zixtar. "They rely on clear chains of command and direct communication. "What do you propose?" asked the Admiral. "We send false orders, create confusion about who is in charge, make them doubt their own intelligence reports." The Admiral looked uncertain. "This seems dishonorable." "War is rarely honorable, Admiral," said Daniel. "But it can be less deadly if we can make the enemy retreat without a fight." The psychological campaign began slowly. Corvin commanders received contradictory orders. Supply ships arrived at the wrong locations. Troops were deployed to defend against attacks that never came. The effect was dramatic. The Corvin military, used to absolute certainty in their chain of command, began to hesitate. Officers double-checked orders, wasting precious time. Some units refused to move without direct confirmation from higher command. 3 months into the campaign, Alliance forces captured a Corvin officer. This was unusual. Corvin soldiers typically fought to the death rather than surrender. The prisoner Colonel Nexar was brought to a secure Alliance facility for questioning. Linda Harrison, a former FBI negotiator, was assigned to lead the interrogation. The Alliance officers expected harsh methods. Instead, they watched in surprise as Linda simply talked with the prisoner. "I understand your frustration," she said to Colonel Nexar. "Your troops were given incorrect coordinates. You were set up to fail." "I followed my orders," Nexar replied stiffly. "Of course you did," Linda agreed. "But were they really your orders? Our intelligence suggests someone has been tampering with Corvin communications." Doubt flickered across the alien's face. "That is not possible." "Yet you ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time," Linda pointed out. "Someone wanted your mission to fail. I wonder who benefits from your failure." For hours, Linda continued this approach, never threatening or raising her voice. She built rapport, created doubt, and offered understanding. By the end, Colonel Nexar was voluntarily providing information about Corvin fleet movements and security protocols. The Alliance officers watching were stunned. "How did you make him talk without coercion?" asked Commander Vrax afterward. "People want to be understood," Linda explained. "Even enemy soldiers. Find their concerns, their doubts, their fears, and you find a way to communicate." The intelligence gained from Colonel Nexar led to a critical discovery. The Corvin battle fleet had a significant vulnerability in their communication system. During specific synchronization periods, their ships were briefly open to external signals. Alliance. High Command called an emergency meeting with all human advisors to discuss this opportunity. "We have never found such a weakness before," said Admiral Zixtar. "This could change everything." Laura Bennett, who had been coordinating the Human Veteran Program, nodded. "The Corvins have been fighting the same way for so long that they've stopped looking for their own weaknesses. They don't expect anyone else to find them." The Admiral looked around the room at the human veterans. "When we first met, we thought we understood what combat was. We had been fighting for generations." He paused. "But Earth's veterans have shown us that knowing how to fight is not the same as understanding war." A plan was quickly developed to exploit the Corvin vulnerability. For the first time, the Alliance would take the offensive against the Corvin Empire. As the mission preparations began, Alan Rodriguez cleaned his rifle and thought about the strange journey that had brought him here. After leaving the Marines, he had never expected to fight again, certainly not among the stars against an alien empire. "Ready for the next mission?" asked Lieutenant Mira, now his regular partner. Alan nodded. "The Corvins think they know what's coming. They're wrong." The discovery of the Corvin weakness changed the entire war. The Alliance, for the first time in decades, had hope. But exploiting this weakness would require a complete revision of their military strategy. General Richard Cooper arrived from Earth 3 days after the discovery. At 65, he had fought in numerous conflicts and later served as a top military strategist. His weathered face and calm eyes reflected decades of hard-earned wisdom. "The Corvins expect us to use this information for a single powerful strike," he told the Alliance commanders gathered in the war room. "That's what they would do. Instead, we'll completely change how we fight." Admiral Zixtar looked confused. but we have a clear advantage now. Shouldn't we use it immediately? And lose it just as quickly, Richard replied. The moment we strike, they'll fix the weakness. Instead, we need to reshape the entire battlefield. Over the next week, Richard introduced concepts that had been standard on Earth for centuries but were revolutionary to the Alliance: decentralized command, mission-oriented tactics, and adaptive battlefield decision-making. Each unit leader needs authority to make decisions based on the situation they face, Richard explained. No more waiting for orders from Central Command. Commander Vrax frowned. But that could lead to chaos. How will we coordinate? By intent, not by specific orders, Kurumari said Richard. Each commander knows the overall goal. How they achieve it depends on what they face on the ground. The Alliance military had operated with rigid hierarchy for thousands of years. This new approach was difficult for them to accept, but the success of the human veterans had earned them enough trust to try. As the Alliance forces began to reorganize, the Corvins launched a massive offensive. They targeted 3 Alliance worlds simultaneously, clearly hoping to end the war before whatever new strategy the Alliance was planning could take effect. The largest attack headed straight for Nexus Prime, the Alliance homeworld. Intelligence indicated that the Corvin Emperor himself was commanding the fleet, an unprecedented move that showed just how seriously they took this campaign. The Alliance prepared for the defense of their homeworld with everything they had. Hundreds of Earth veterans joined the effort, each bringing their unique experience to the fight. Susan Bailey, a former combat medic who had served in some of Earth's worst conflict zones, revolutionized the Alliance medical response system in just 2 weeks. In combat, the first hour after injury is critical, she told the Alliance medical teams. We need mobile treatment units close to the fighting, not centralized hospitals that take hours to reach. The Alliance doctors were skeptical until Susan showed them Earth's data on survival rates. The new approach was implemented immediately. The Corvin fleet approached Nexus Prime. Laura Bennett stood in the Alliance Command Center alongside Admiral Zixtar. 3 years had passed since she first met the Alliance representatives on Earth. Now she was one of their most trusted advisors. The Corvins expect a traditional defense, Laura said, studying the tactical display. Their ships are positioned for our standard orbital formations. But we won't be using those, replied the Admiral with a slight smile. For the first time in their long acquaintance, Laura saw something new in the alien's eyes, anticipation rather than dread. The battle began at dawn. The Corvin fleet entered the Nexus system with overwhelming force, over 500 warships, arranged in their perfect attack formation. Their sensors showed the expected Alliance defense fleet waiting in orbit around Nexus Prime. What they didn't detect were the hundreds of small stealth ships hiding among the system's asteroid fields and moons. These ships, commanded by veterans of Earth's special forces, carried specially designed signal disruptors. When the Corvin fleet began their standard communication synchronization, these ships activated their disruptors. All across the Corvin, fleet communication systems failed. Some ships received no orders, others received contradictory commands. A few received false retreat orders. The perfect Corvin formation began to break apart. On the ground, former Army Sergeant Pete Donovan led a mixed Human Alliance team protecting the main planetary shield generator. The Corvins had landed troops, specifically to target this facility. They're coming from the north, reported an Alliance soldier monitoring the sensors. Standard attack formation. Pete nodded. Just as expected, they always attack head-on. He turned to his team. Remember, we don't meet them directly. We let them think they're winning until they reach the third perimeter. The defending forces had created a series of traps and false targets throughout the facility. The Corvins, expecting a straightforward defense of the shield generator, found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to vanish and reappear, striking from unexpected angles before disappearing again. In space, the battle took an unexpected turn. The Corvin Emperor, seeing his carefully planned attack falling apart, ordered his flagship to lead a direct assault on the Alliance command station. 6 massive Corvin battleships broke from the main fleet and accelerated toward the station. Admiral Zixtar watched calmly as the enemy ships approached. They're trying to decapitate our command, he observed. As they've always done, Laura nodded. But unlike before, our forces will continue fighting effectively even if this station is destroyed. The Admiral gave the signal. From hiding places throughout the system, Alliance ships appeared and converged on the Corvan battleships. These weren't the large warships the Corvans expected, but smaller, faster vessels piloted by mixed human Alliance crews. The Corvan battleships, designed to fight other large vessels, struggled to target the smaller ships that swarmed around them. Alliance pilots, trained by Earth veterans in evasive tactics, darted in to deliver precise strikes before pulling away. After 30 minutes of intense fighting, 3 Corvan battleships had been disabled. The other 3, including the Emperor's flagship, began to retreat. All across the system, the same story unfolded. The Corvan forces, facing an enemy that fought in ways they had never encountered, became confused and disorganized. Units that lost contact with command didn't know how to proceed. Commanders who faced unexpected resistance had no contingency plans. By nightfall, the Corvan fleet was in full retreat. The news spread quickly to the other battlefronts. The Corvans had failed to take Nexus Prime. For the first time in living memory, the Corvan Empire had suffered a decisive defeat. 1 week later, the Corvan Emperor sent a message requesting peace talks. The war that had lasted for generations was ending. In a quiet ceremony on Nexus Prime, Alliance and human leaders gathered to honor those who had fallen in the final battle. Carol White, a retired Army colonel who had helped plan the defense, stood before the assembled crowd. "When I left Earth, I thought my fighting days were over," she said softly. "I never imagined I would help defend another species' homeworld against conquest." She looked around at the mixed gathering of humans and aliens. The Corvans thought they knew combat because they had been fighting for centuries, but they only knew one way to fight. Earth's history forced us to learn many ways. Admiral Zixtar stepped forward. "We asked for Earth's help because we needed allies. What we received was something more valuable, a new understanding of conflict itself." He turned to the human veterans. "You taught us that true strength in battle comes not from superior weapons or numbers, but from adaptability, creativity, and the will to survive against all odds." As the ceremony ended, Laura Bennett gazed up at the stars visible through the Memorial Hall's transparent dome. Somewhere out there, the Corvan Empire was beginning to learn the lessons that Earth had learned through its long, painful history of warfare. "Do you think there will be lasting peace?" asked Admiral Zixtar, joining her. Laura considered the question carefully. "Peace is never certain," she replied. "But understanding your enemy better makes peace more possible. The Corvans now know there's more to combat than they ever imagined. That knowledge might be the thing that finally convinces them to choose peace instead." 6 months after the Battle of Nexus Prime, the peace treaty between the Alliance and the Corvan Empire was signed. The document, written in both Alliance Standard and Corvan High Speech, included terms that would have been unthinkable just a year earlier. The Grand Hall where the signing took place was filled with representatives from all Alliance worlds, Earth, and the Corvan Empire. Laura Bennett stood among the Earth delegation, watching as Admiral Zixtar and the Corvan Emperor Darvik signed the final page. "Never thought I'd see this day," whispered Frank Dawson, standing beside her. The former Army Ranger had aged during the war, gray now dominating his once dark hair. "Think it'll last?" Laura considered the question. "It has a better chance than most peace treaties I've seen." One of the most surprising developments had been the Corvan request for human advisors. Not for warfare, but to help them understand what had happened. The Empire had never known defeat in its long history. They wanted to learn from it. General Richard Cooper had been appointed to lead this advisory mission. Now he stood near the Corvan delegation, his face serious as he observed the proceedings. After the ceremony, a reception was held in the gardens outside. Alliance members and Corvans mingled awkwardly, centuries of war not easily forgotten. Laura found herself approached by a Corvan military officer she recognized from briefings, General Tarvek, one of their most respected commanders. "Captain Bennett," he said with a formal bow. "I wish to meet the human who first contacted the Alliance." Laura nodded politely. It's been a long journey from that first meeting, General. Indeed. The Corvin studied her with his 4 yellow eyes. Our scholars are still trying to understand your species. How did a world with such limited space travel develop such advanced combat thinking? By fighting ourselves, unfortunately, Laura replied. Earth's history is filled with wars. We learned because we had to. The Corvin considered this. We have only ever fought outward against other species. Perhaps that limited our understanding. Across the galaxy, changes were already happening. On the border world of Talos III, former combat medic Susan Bailey was helping establish a new medical training facility. The building, still under construction, would house the first joint Alliance Corvin Medical School. The wounds of war don't care what uniform you wear, Susan explained to the mixed group of alien medical students. The techniques we developed on Earth can save lives on both sides. An older Corvin doctor named Merrick approached her after the class. Your methods saved my son, he said quietly. He was on a battleship at Nexus Prime. The Alliance rescue teams used your protocols when they found survivors. Susan nodded, understanding the cost of war in a way only medical personnel truly could. That's why we're here, so the next generation doesn't have to learn medicine under fire. On Earth, the influence of the Galactic Alliance was becoming visible. New technologies from Alliance worlds were being adapted for Earth use, while human veterans continued to travel to the stars to share their knowledge. At the United Nations headquarters in New York, President Harris addressed the General Assembly about the new opportunities and challenges. Earth has found its place in a larger community, he said, not through technological superiority or economic power, but through the hard-won wisdom of our veterans. The knowledge gained from our troubled past has helped forge a peace that spans the stars. 3 years after the peace treaty, a new institution opened its doors on a neutral world between Alliance and Corvin space. The Galactic Peace Academy would train peacekeepers from all species in conflict resolution, emergency response, and, when necessary, defensive combat tactics. Samantha Rivera, now 60, had been asked to serve as its first human instructor. The former lieutenant colonel walked slowly through the campus, taking in the mixture of architectural styles that represented the diverse worlds of both former enemies. Quite a change from our first training sessions, said Commander Vrax, who had become a close friend during the war. The Alliance officer now served as the Academy's administrator. From teaching combat to teaching peace, Samantha agreed. Though the lessons aren't so different. How so? Asked Vrax. Understanding your opponent, adapting to changing situations, knowing when to stand firm and when to compromise. She smiled slightly. The same skills that make a good warrior make a good peacekeeper. In a quiet corner of the Academy grounds, a memorial had been built to honor those who had fallen in the long war. Names from all species were engraved on smooth stone walls surrounding a central garden. Every day, people from former enemy worlds came to remember and reflect. Alan Rodriguez visited the memorial whenever he was at the Academy. The former sniper now trained special security teams that protected diplomatic missions to unstable regions. He found a certain peace in the quiet garden. On this particular day, he noticed a young Corvin standing before the wall studying the names. My father's name is here, the young Corvin said without turning. He died at Nexus Prime. Alan nodded. Many good soldiers died that day, on both sides. The young Corvin finally turned to look at him. You are Earth human, a veteran? Yes, Alan replied simply. I am training to be a peacekeeper, said the Corvin. My instructors say we should study Earth's history to understand conflict better. It's not a pleasant study, Alan warned. But necessary, replied the Corvin. To prevent future wars, we must understand why they happen. He hesitated. Would you tell me about Earth's wars sometime? Not the tactics, but the reasons? Alan considered the request. 5 years ago, he had been targeting Corvins through his rifle scope. Now one was asking him to share the lessons of Earth's bloody history. I think that could be arranged, he said finally. On the last day of the Academy's first term, a ceremony was held for the graduating class. 100 peacekeepers from 20 different worlds, including both Alliance and Corvin species, received their commissions. Admiral Zixtar, now serving as the Alliance's chief diplomat, gave the closing address. "When we first met the humans of Earth, we thought we understood combat," he told the graduates. "We had been fighting for generations. But Earth's veterans taught us that understanding war is not the same as knowing how to fight." He looked out at the diverse faces before him. "Now we face a greater challenge, understanding peace. It is not simply the absence of war, but something we must actively build and maintain. Just as Earth's veterans taught us new ways to fight, they now teach us new ways to preserve peace." As the new peacekeepers dispersed to their first assignments throughout the galaxy, Laura Bennett watched from the audience. Now a senior diplomatic advisor, she had seen the journey from first contact to bitter war to fragile peace. "Was it worth it?" asked Frank Dawson, who had come to attend the ceremony. Laura watched as human veterans and aliens from dozens of worlds mingled together, sharing stories and plans for the future. "Ask me in another 10 years, she replied. "Peace is always a work in progress." But as she looked at the young peacekeepers heading out to the stars, Laura allowed herself to hope. Perhaps the hard lessons of Earth's combat veterans would help build something that had often seemed impossible on their own world: a lasting peace.